So welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be emceeing for this talk on leadership of responsible AI. So just a couple of notes before I begin. So if you have any questions along the way during Elizabeth's talk, please put it on the chat and I'll kind of read it out at the end and then I'll get her to hopefully shed some light on those. And there's also some booths that you can check out after this talk. So please make sure that you go there and get all your freebies. So just a couple of ads before we begin, but let's start. So this whole topic of responsible AI, I think, needs no introduction. It has been something that has come to light in the past many years. We've seen it come up in cases where we've denied loans for single mothers, or we've had people of different races being not recognized correctly by systems. And unfortunately, these are just biases humans, I think, have had that have kind of seeped into these systems and now completely automated in a way that it can make a lot more trouble than before. But of course, AI also is for good, and we can do a lot of awesome things with it. So I'm really hoping Elizabeth can shed light on both of those topics and kind of give us her perspective on it. A little bit about Elizabeth before we start. So Elizabeth has been named as one of the 15 AI ethics leaders by Forbes. She has worked with a lot of executives, small business owners, lots of different institutions to educate them on AI ethics and leadership. She spent over 2 decades studying the science of business and technology and how it influences the society as a whole, while leading some large-scale technology initiatives at Fortune 500 companies. So she's been really busy. She's also pursuing her doctoral degree at Pepperdine University with focus on, as you may guess, leadership of responsible AI. And she currently serves as the Global Chief AI Culture and Ethics Officer for Women in AI, where the programs that she supports works with almost 8,000 women all around the world. So I'm really excited to listen to her, and I want to turn it over to her so she can tell us all about this topic.
Well, first off, thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation today. I'm super excited to be able to share a bit of my research and a bit of my work. I bring you greetings from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so again, thank you. Let's get started. So for this presentation, I really am just going to ask you all to kind of take off your technical hats for a minute and consider what I'm sharing with you from a social or society perspective. From someone who is waking up to the power of AI and its influence that it's going to have or is having on every aspect of our lives, but also that there are harms that can be inflicted on vulnerable populations, as we've heard, and communities of color. So my hope is that by the end of this presentation, you'll have a better understanding of why so many people are working in the AI ethics space and working to ensure leadership of responsible AI. And I love this quote, and I'm just going to place it here: no application without representation. So I curated this presentation to cover a few points, which I hope will guide our discussion afterwards. Just a few short videos that will be intertwined in between, but we'll talk about AI development or just product development in general. We'll talk about keptology, which is an initial focus I'm working on at Pepperdine. And then we'll get into the bulk of the presentation where I will share various use cases to demonstrate what could happen in the absence of AI ethics, inclusion, and or diverse perspectives when we're building out our technology projects. And then finally, I'll share, based on my experience in the global community, how we all can influence AI innovation through leadership of responsible AI. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me a bit. I've got to jump between videos and the screens and all of that. And so I'm just going to ask you to bear with me. But I want to start with this presentation, sharing a little bit about my journey. I am from St. Paul, Minnesota, but I spent the bulk of my leadership career as a business technologist, I call it, in the DC area, working with Fortune 500 companies, Department of Defense, Defense Intelligence Agency. And I have had really good experiences with technology. I love technology. But in 2014, I moved back to Minnesota for family reasons, and I could not find a job. With all of my technical experience, with all of my degrees and certifications, I couldn't find a job. And so I spent a couple of years trying to sort things out, but it really gave me an appreciation for what the digital poor experience, because I was a part of that digital poverty. And so, as I mentioned, I learned a lot about how society thinks about technology, because I had to think about technology in that way. Things turned for me, and I was also awarded the inaugural Stanford Race and Tech Fellowship, where I began to work with the city of Minneapolis on what I was considering tech transparency around various technology tools that they were using, specifically law enforcement. I co-led a coalition, Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment, which we will cover, with the city of Minneapolis. And after the murder of George Floyd, our work became particularly motivated around transparency and the tools that law enforcement had at their disposal. And then that has since led to my Stanford HAI affiliation. And then, of course, you've already heard about the Pepperdine doctoral studies that I'm pursuing. So let's move on to AI development. I think it's important to cover at a high level what happens during the technology development process. And I always like to start with the happy path of AI, because I am a technologist and I love innovation and I want it to really work for all. So as many of you may know, when you get to work on something cool and futuristic, there's this sense of pride. And in the AI development process, many of us know that once a budget is approved, then teams and leaders are assigned. You start with your requirements and your concept and your design sessions. Then you work everything from development through execution, operations, you have your new versions. And in between there's testing, right? So, but there are also many hands and approvals that take place for any of these phases to get to the next phase, whether it's waterfall or agile. But at this point, many discussions have happened to make a decision to move forward with your minimal viable product. Agreements regarding trade-offs have also occurred around what to take to market, as well as the involving of other key stakeholders such as marketing, finance, and training. And so when you get to this point in the life cycle, someone or a group of people have said, we have what we have and we're ready to move forward and take our product to market. And speaking of innovation, this is an example of a type of innovation that excites some of us and the type of innovation we can expect to move forward. On August 19th of this year, Elon Musk unveiled the Tesla bot, a humanoid robot utilizing Tesla's vehicle AI, which he says is intended to be friendly. And it's designed for us to fall in love with it. The Tesla bot, as he's described, would eliminate dangerous or repetitive or boring tasks, like a robot could go to the store and get groceries. And not that that task might be dangerous, but we might find it repetitive and boring. And on the 19th of August as well, Gayle King and Mark Zuckerberg conducted their first ever virtual reality interview in Facebook's new Horizon work group. A VR app that allows coworkers to interact in virtual offices using the Oculus or Facebook's Oculus headset. And this would be an experience like any other team meeting, except in this environment, in order for it to work, we'll have to share very sensitive information in this environment. Nothing wrong with innovation, but I want to just put a pin in these two examples for a minute and share with you another video that highlights innovation. All right, so why was it important for me to kind of share almost 2 minutes of a video? Well, for me, because there are a couple of items that stand out that I want to share with you all as we move forward into this section about captology. So Astro is actually a home monitoring system by Amazon, which boasts of other cool features like time with grandparents and dancing and bringing beverages, but it's also collecting the movements of those in the home and anyone connected to it through a device. So your location when you're out and about. But what's happening with all the data that's being collected that we're so willing to give up in the name of innovation? Do we know? So we've just covered a few examples of new AI-enabled technology and the ways that companies want us to think about these technologies, thinking about them as friends, as something cool, as the next innovation. Well, let's talk about captology and how these experiences are impacting our lives. So in 1996, captology was derived from the term computers as persuasive technology, and the area of inquiry explores the overlapping space between persuasion, like in general, influence, motivation, or something that wants to incite a certain behavior, and computing technology. And this includes the design and the research and program analysis of interactive computer products, such as the web or desktop software or a kiosk or specialized devices created for the purpose of changing our attitudes and our behaviors. And it also studies the impacts of these technologies by the narratives that we consume with them. So what does this mean for us? So according to a Nielsen study in 2020, adults in the United States spent just shy of 12 hours, half of each day, interacting with media at home and or on personal devices, which for me is a glaring challenge and a question. How are omnipresent narratives consumed? And whether this consumption is through tools, through theater, through TV, cinema, videos, or gossip, consumption is at an all-time high. So any person may have multiple consumption styles depending on the type of narrative or the quality of narrative and the value to us. So captology suggests that technology persuades us to think one way or the other. So if I design technology, if I develop marketing materials, if I decide who gets through to a hiring manager, I'm bringing my own personal bias, my thoughts into the workplace, possibly because of what I'm consuming and the persuasive narratives in which I'm being asked to consume these narratives. So if we're consuming 12 hours, narratives 12 hours a day, and the narratives are presented through a technology device, that may be responsible for how we are also persuaded to design technology now and how the technology is designed in the future. And one additional curious thought is how much of this is my doing when I'm asked to select certain content that interests me most or what I interact with, and how do we use this information to form our quick decisions about our interactions with people, places, and things. So if we are consumers of narratives through our interactions with technology, how does that influence the design of technology? And more importantly, for me as a scholar practitioner, how does it influence responsible AI? Now, I want to share a couple of use cases. So we've covered what AI is, and we've talked about the development life cycle, and we've talked about what technology is in terms of an omnipresent narrative. But what happens when our technology worlds and our social worlds collide? All of the work and the time and money allocated to what seems to be an exciting initiative to advance technology, only to end up with what's on the right, only for society to sound the alarm and advocate for possibly a ban, but for transparency, oversight, explainability, fairness, and accountability. And these headlines are on the right are what many members of historically excluded communities of color and vulnerable populations are experiencing as a result of AI innovation. And I'd like to turn your attention to a few of these challenges. So I asked an earlier question about what happens when our technology worlds and our social worlds collide. Well, the Civic Tech Initiative that I mentioned earlier that I worked on as part of my fellowship was with the city of Minneapolis. It's called POSTME, Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology. And having a technology background and seeing some of the harmful outcomes in recent tech innovations in certain communities, I absolutely wanted to get involved and help. And as I mentioned, following the murder of George Floyd, we really wanted to unpack what kinds of tools the Minneapolis Police Department had at their disposal and how they were using them in the community. But our work does not come from a place of technophobia, but rather we're about embracing technology proactively so that when these tools are implemented, communities have trust that they're being used responsibly and not targeted and not to target certain populations or citizens. And while we were successful in banning facial recognition here in Minneapolis this past February, this does not stop tech design from happening. And so I wanted to learn a little bit more about why these things are designed the way they are. So as part of our research for POSTME, we also looked at how computer vision models derive insights from the images or from images to make predictions. And in both of these pictures, a temperature is being taken with an infrared thermometer. But with the image on the left of the lighter skinned hand and the lighter skinned person, the algorithm predicts One set of labels: technology, electronic device, photography, and possibly a mobile phone, with a 68% probability that the image includes technology. But with the image on the right of the darker skinned person in the darker skinned hand, the algorithm predicts and labels the item in the phone or in the photo as a gun, photography, firearm, or plant, with an 88% probability that the image includes a gun. And the reason for this is because of biased training data. Bias in training data happens when there is a lack of diversity in the training data and when there isn't an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, ages, skin tones, and data associations. But for now, let's take it one step further. So in this example, one of our coalition members lightened the image to see if the prediction would change. And as you can see, it did indeed change. Once the image was lightened, a gun was not predicted. What was predicted in the image contained a hand. And so when you see these things I'm showing you, I want you to keep in the forefront of your mind that because of the absence of some sort of ethics, standards, processes, policies, procedures, governance, frameworks, and values around inclusive interests, this is what happens. And all of this was missed during the entire technology lifecycle: a lack of a diverse or an inclusive lens. So we talked earlier about the consumption of narratives and us being consumers of narratives. So my interest is in how these narratives shape tech design and the use based on our belief about the use. All right, so now let's think about consumers of narratives. The video that we just watched, the short one, warms us up to thinking of robot dogs as playful and synchronous in their dance moves and friendly. And this is the question for all of us as we spend so much time using technology consuming narratives. How do we consume these narratives? And what are the ways that we consume the narratives? And how might they influence our AI development and our AI design? And are we saying we want more of it? What about ethics? Why is this technology even being designed? So I want to pause here real quickly to acknowledge Dr. Ruha Benjamin's work, where she discusses moving beyond techno determinism and techno utopia, where there's this idea that tech is going to save all of us. And I want to show you just one more video that I think will bring to home the importance of having these discussions about the narratives that we consume. We saw the dancing robot dogs, and now these same dogs are showcased at a conference with weapons on their back. Let's think about this for a minute. Let's think about the image on the bottom right-hand corner. So this is possibly a frontline worker or someone who's taking the temperature for health safety reasons. And this image could possibly have been scraped. There are facial recognition companies that are scraping images from the website without ethics being in place. And this person could end up in some database somewhere. It could be a database that is used by law enforcement, and law enforcement could be using it to predict whether or not this person is a potential threat. So imagine dispatching one of these dogs to a community or a group of people gathering because these images that the robot dog was trained on has false associations. And this is becoming a real reality. And this is why leadership of responsible AI is so important. So these are some powerful, there are some powerful innovations happening with and without oversight and accountability and transparency. And everyone needs to get engaged in the work of as public trust advocates, even in your current role, and especially in the design and the development process. And I want to highlight these trends based on my research over the last several years. But what I really want to highlight is that there's so much of an opportunity to do good as it relates to AI. There are unlimited possibilities to continue to innovate and advance further into the fourth industrial revolution and the digital age, as well as protecting our intellectual property, all while embracing an inclusive culture across organizations. And for 2022, I just want to highlight a few things that are coming in the next year. There's a lot of focus on responsible AI and purposeful AI. There's a lot more focus on social actualization in AI, using AI and technology to help communities thrive, to help individuals thrive. There are also a lot more roles in AI ethics for non-technical as well as technical roles. And then of course, surveillance tech tends to be a big issue right now. And there's a big focus on responsible uses of that technology. And then, of course, algorithmic accountability, policies, lots of regulations are on the table, lots of guidance coming from the United Nations, World Economic Forum, EU, NIST, all kinds of organizations are now starting to provide us with some guidance that we can take within our organizations. So as I close, I believe that my job is to help leaders explore as many use cases as possible when it comes to AI development and AI ethics, and to share my message that inclusive design has to be non-negotiable because there is no way to eliminate human bias in the design process. We are all consumers of narratives. And with that, I just want to say start somewhere. A few years ago, I did just that. I decided to talk to a data scientist about bias in algorithms. And that curiosity led me to more discussions. And I went on to conduct learning events for an organization. And then I helped them write their first AI ethics principles. So I just want to say there's a role for all of us to play. And with that, I want to say thank you. And I realize that was a lot to unpack, but I hope that it gives us enough to use in our dialogue. And if there was something that I shared that was meaningful today, let me know and let's have a conversation about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's really, I think you hit the nail on all the topics that have been in the news, in our minds, because people realize that AI is not just some black box, some crazy thing, but it's just something that can affect every single transaction you have with society, right? So
absolutely.
Awesome. Are there questions? Let me just scroll in, and I think I see questions. So let me scroll. And I think Danielle has a question that says, why did you single out XGB in the anytime performance comparison?
I'm sorry, what was that question?
I'm just scrolling through. Okay, just sorry.
Okay.
I think this chat.
Oh, Dave said that's another chat.
Yeah. It feels like I'm getting all of the chats together, and usually it doesn't happen that way. I'm trying to see what's happening.
There is something here from, I think it's Sahil.
If you see it, go first.
Yeah, it says, thank you so much for the talk. As a recruiter, it's so interesting to see the bias in AI and something I can speak to future candidates about. And if they're seeing it as well, appreciate you. Oh, thank you. Yes. And I would say as a recruiter, check to see if your company is using an AI-enabled resume sifting software and do some research on that, because those have been found to exclude certain populations based on data associations, based on default settings, based on how the data was trained. So that would be interesting. I would think would be an interesting case to pursue as well.
Awesome. As I figured out what I was doing. I was in the event chat, not the sessions one.
That's all right.
And I'm like, what's going on? It's not like lining up. I think Giova has a question. How to convince operational teams if using AI, it's always extra work for them to learn new tech?
Oh, that's an interesting. So I guess I would say that I would want to know how that happens with cybersecurity training and information that happens today. Because remember, way back when cybersecurity became a hot topic, it really was just one group had responsibility for it. Now we are all forced to take these trainings every year or every couple of years. We're also having to change our passwords several times a year. And so I think that AI needs to be operationalized from that perspective, that it needs to be everyone's responsibility. And I know that many organizations have opportunities for you to take some sort of training. I would suggest doing that from an AI perspective. It's going to have to be incorporated into our work. We're all going to have to kind of we're all going to have to kind of figure this out. But I know that it can be hard. I spend time with executives and operational teams, and I will say that it's a practice. There's not a checklist that you can land on someone's desk and they follow this 10-point checklist and they become an AI ethics expert or just someone who's aware of it. It's practice. So I'll say that.
Let me ask a follow-up, Elizabeth. In terms I read your bio and you said you go into companies and helping them understand about AI ethics and responsible AI. So what are some of like some concrete things you tell them to look at in terms of start here or do this, or you know what I'm saying? Like, because
Yeah.
you can't be obviously cloned. So if we need to like do something on our own, how do we start?
Yeah, for me, I really work with a lot of executives and I want to know what their business problem is. So let's start there. Like, what is your business problem? What are you trying to solve? What is it? Is it productivity? Are you trying to innovate, put something new in the market? Let's figure out if AI then can help you get there. And then let's figure out if there are tools that are available, or if you want to build one, or if there's some sort of customizable approach. And then let's first, though, kind of put some AI ethics principles in place so that you can, that kind of guide how you think about AI, how you develop AI, how you start designing it. And it also gives you some space to say, you know, so that you can explore these things. Because like I said, it's a practice. What I'm finding is most people think that you can put frameworks in place, you can put a governance structure in place, and then automatically you're safe. It's about a cultural change. And so that's what I speak to them about. And some are more advanced and some are not. Some organizations want me to actually start with more of a diversity and inclusion kind of a conversation so that everyone can feel like they have a safe space to bring up issues when through AI development. And then some are, they want the principles, they want us to unpack the life cycle, they want to bring in diverse perspectives. So it really depends. But I would say start with the business problem. What are you trying to solve?
Right. And you brought up a really good point, because you almost want it to move away from just being a compliance thing. You know, like we do lots of things for compliance and just let's tick the box, let's get it done, because if we don't do it, we'll get fined, to something where we're seriously thinking about the impact that it has on society, and being internalizing that. We're not just saying, oh, let me just get this
Yeah.
training done because I need to finish it.
And I'll add that employees are part of society too.
Yeah.
And I think you have to remember that it's not that employees spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week in this organization and they go home and do something separate. Like they're bringing everything that they experience in their home lives to work as well. So I would think, I encourage executives to think about their employees as being a part of that culture as well.
Exactly. Exactly. So there are a few more questions. So, Ushnish has a question. How do we connect social justice community activists with ethical technologists? The groups speak different languages.
Oh, I would like for them to expound on that. Can you read that question one more time?
It says, how do we connect social justice community activists with
Yeah.
ethical technologists?
I will say that is a huge gap because I spent 3 years immersed in the community here in Minneapolis, advocating for tech transparency. And I was really the only technologist. Policymakers don't know a lot about technology. I think that this is actually a very good opportunity, because I've been thinking about this for a while, for someone to create a primer, like a 3 to 6 minute primer that talks about what some of these challenges are, and something that you can give to a policymaker, something that you can give to social activists. And that was a part of the challenge we had in our coalition. And we had to keep reminding and educating new policymakers, new coalition members about what we were trying to do. So I actually think a primer would be a good opportunity. And I haven't seen anything like that does that connects those kinds of worlds. So I think that's a great question. And I hope that that's something someone can do.
Yeah, I know Shanish, we're interested, definitely. As Elizabeth said, we can all jump in. So, you know, if that's something you're passionate about, why not? Something you could maybe help contribute to. So, Graham has a question that says, any advice for organizations developing AI around setting up processes that mitigate the risk of unintended harms coming out of AI technology?
Yeah, and I don't like to just offer one. I know that there's some things in the chat and people are offering certain solutions, and I think that that's great. I think it depends on the organization, but I will say that there are things such as the Equity Fluent Playbook that is out of UC Berkeley. World Economic Forum has some information. There's the AI blind spots. There are cards that help data scientists unpack whether or not there's bias. So there are different tools, but it really depends on the organization. I again think learning events are the best way to go, no matter what tool you're using. Create it for your team, create it for your boss, or do a lunch and learn. But I would ask people to kind of explore that on their own. And the reason why I say that is because that's how all of us get involved, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so different companies that I work with do different things because of the culture of the organization.
Right. Right. Just to add to that is, I think more of starting with, if you're a data scientist building a model and you're doing predictions, don't look at the accuracy metrics alone. Just unpack your results a bit more and maybe look at starting with just simple cuts of your results to see is something getting in there that shouldn't be, right? I mean, as simple as that might
Yeah.
help you open up a few of those questions.
I'm also very curious as to how data associations and data annotations are done, because in that example that I used with the infrared thermometer, someone actually associated the darker skinned hand and an infrared thermometer as, like, they associated that as a person with a gun. Do you know what I'm saying? And I know that there are companies that actually outsource data annotation or data association. So I would be very curious as to how unpacking that could happen, if that makes sense.
That's a really interesting one, because you're right, because that's where the problem starts, right? Like, and then it gets fed into the AI system. So, Kate has a question. In the context of a statistics class, I've often seen an idea presented that we can offload the work of distinguishing useful data associations to nefarious ones to a domain expert. I wonder if you think this is a useful way to address biases in data collection and building models, have a domain expert responsible for looking out for potential ethical problems, maybe in addition to wider responsibility throughout the dev pipeline.
Ooh, Kate, I am not a ones and zeros person, and I have yet to take my statistics class, so I don't know if I can help. Maybe you can help with that question.
I think if I think it
That's
stems
a good
from
one.
Go for it, Elizabeth.
Oh, no. I said that's a good one. I don't know
Yeah,
if I have a great answer for that.
yeah, and often the problem is kind of like that, right? Where data scientists are set to work in domains that they may not be familiar with, where they're given data to say, and when you look at it numbers, for sure, we can build models, we can build accuracy metrics, and show you the best way to, say that our model beats another model without even understanding very much about the data, or at least digging in deep enough to be able to take these biases out. So definitely having a domain expert helps. And I think having it as early as Elizabeth said, the data collection piece, I think makes a lot more sense. Like, do it even before you're getting data into the system so they can, if there's anything, they can help you there. So
yeah, I wish I had time to dig into that, because that really is it's fascinating when you think that there's actually a human that is doing that.
yeah.
And I'm just curious as to how that happens. And then that, like I said, that data is sold then, or a company purchases it. And how are we to make sure that they have really good ethical practices in place, these companies, that's third-party companies that are doing the data associations and the data annotations. It's all very curious and will keep us busy for a very long time.
Yeah, that's true. With that, I don't see any more questions. So I think we're
Okay.
at time. So Elizabeth, thank you so much. I
Thank
asked to be
you.
on the session as an MC because of the topic. It's really something that I like and I care about, and hoping to do something there. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all your insights. It was great.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I pivoted to leadership of responsible AI after spending 3 years in community. And I'll say this because I really believe that that's where we can start with directing fair and equitable technology, those who have the influence to say we need to do this work. And I found when I was in community that people were trading off time with their family, their friends, during holidays, so that they could sit with us and advocate for what should be a basic human right, which is safe technology. And so that is why I pivoted to leadership. That's why I call it out, is because we have to help a lot of those leaders who are maybe 3 or 4 levels away from where the data scientists are, help them understand the impacts of their decisions. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here today.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thanks everyone for coming. Definitely check out the booths. Like I said, for all the freebies, I've been asked to say that again, so that you can go and avail everything that you need from there. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you in future talks. Bye.